The germs stay alive on your hands and get passed on to your friends, and they'll get sick too. Let's chase the germs away. Let's chase the germs away by keeping our hands clean. And when you want to sneeze or when you want to cough, do it in your elbow. Germs, 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 they make us sick. Germs, germs, germs are not our friends. Germs, 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 they make us sick. Germs, 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 germs are not your friends.
Grade 12, welcome back. And today we want to see what is happening due to all the factories that are producing a lot of chemicals into the air. So now we focus from water more to the air. And as you have learned since very young in physical science about acid rain, we are going to see how will that contribute to the influence that us as humans have on our beautiful planet. And of course, we first want to know what is acid rain. And acid rain, of course, are the gases, nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxide, that are produced due to human activities, motor vehicles, factories, and this will dissolve in the water vapor, condensation take place, and now we know clouds will rain, but precipitation that is mixed with this acid, sulfuric acid and nitric acid, will eventually return back to the earth. And that is what acid rain is. So the burning of fossil fuels, vehicles, and chemicals from large factories, sulfur dioxide, nitrogenous oxides, will cause the gases accumulating and dissolving in the water vapor. The effects of acid rain is that human structures that are made out of limestone will be dissolved by the acids. The soil, together with the organisms living in the soil, will be affected. Water and plants will change. And I want us to start with the acid rain that cause lower pH and high aluminium concentrations in the surface water. So acid, we understand, lowers pH. Aluminium, the acids that fall on the soil, now removed the metals, and the metals leached into the water bodies. And high levels are toxic for the animals in the ocean. So, biodiversity, a huge variation of organisms that can fill up a food web so that everyone can stay alive, will be reduced. Lakes, rivers, our fragile ecosystems where each species depend on other to survive. So if one disappears, it will have an effect on the other. Here we see a limestone statue, but the buildings are also made out of limestone, and you can see how it is dissolved due to the high acid in the air. And here we see very clearly when the acid depositions came down and it fall on the soil, the calcium leached from the needles and the layers on top of the tree, the cuticles, are being removed. So now the leaf is exposed for diseases, and we know it also prevents evaporation, and the tree will be much colder. Aluminium, as we have said, will not only leach into the soil water together with other calcium and magnesium metals move into water, but the aluminium will also destroy the hair roots, and the plant will suffer to absorb water. And the calcium and magnesium will leach into the soil, and the heavy metals will eventually end up into the water body. So if you care to look in your textbook on page 578 and 579, you will find there all the different effects. In the soil, this leaching out of minerals make the soil with less nutrients in it, and the microorganisms can also not do their job in the acids. The pH is too low for them. The water, aluminium, mercury in water bodies is toxic. It will kill the plankton, which is the producers, and so the whole food chain will change, and it can also damage the groundwater and our drinking water. On plants, it dissolves nutrients like magnesium, calcium, and potassium from the leaves, and the leaves will then change from a nice green color to a brown color. It damaged the fine root hairs, as we said, and that reduced the productivity excuse me, of the farm and the forest land. It damaged the leaves, it damaged the barks, and now there's a possibility for diseases, and it attacks the waxy cuticle. I hope that you followed in your textbook. And what can we do to prevent that? Having the metals washed out of the leaf, the cuticle are removed, and we can see it is exposed, getting brown, diseases, and it can die. Scrubbers are a mechanism, a little equipment tool that they put in the chimneys of factories that will, as they say here, it will remove the sulfur dioxide from power stations and electricity generating facilities. In motor cars, they put in the exhaust system catalytic converters, which will also convert the nitrogen oxide into a nitrogen gas. And we know that our atmosphere do not have a problem with nitrogen gas. No, they are 78%. So we can now remember the scrubbers, the scrubbers for sulfur dioxide back to sulfur, and that is in the power stations. Power stations. That can help us to remember. Scrubbers, sulfur dioxide to sulfur in the power stations. then the catalytic converters in the motor cars, and we know motor cars, nitrogen is what they need. So the nitrogen dioxide change into nitrogen, and we know our air can continue with some nitrogen in it. We can limit fossil fuels by buying cars that works on electricity. Yes. Or we can drive with our bicycles. We can try to limit transport, but I think that is not very realistic in our country with its huge distances. Coal are crushed and washed before it is used to remove the sulfur, and oil are also being treated to remove sulfur. That is how we reduce acid rain. And then, when we look at all these fuels that are being burned, this oil that we use as an energy generating source, it is detrimental and dangerous when it ends up in our ocean. Here we see pictures. You know, if you are a bird and you need your feathers either to float or to fly, and it is full of oil, it is impossible to move. You will die because you cannot find food, and you become an easy prey for the predators. Here we see the fur on the seals, which are also covered and clogged with oil, and it is not good for them. And here we see a huge and large oil spill. So, I want you to look in your book and see if you can make a list of damage that can be done by an oil spill. And I want you to look at land animals, marine animals, and even the smaller microorganisms and smaller creatures. And remember to look at what is happening to the plants. And this is a little video that I want you to look at. Right, and that brings us to, you saw in the video a few plants that you can make using oil booms. Oil booms is that huge pipe that can trap the oil. Oil floats on water. And then they use skimmers and sorbents that can absorb the oil. They can burn it, but I wonder what is the effect of that fire of huge oil spills on the water temperature and then on the water animals. Dispersants, which help them to move away the little oil. You know, when we add some sunlight liquid to our oily fatty dishes, it's also dispersed. Now, hot water and high pressure washing, using manual labor by raking and picking it up with shovels. Bioremediation is where they have bacteria and microorganisms that can feed on the oil and break them up. Like an oil decomposer is something that they also already are using. Chemical stabilization of oil by special chemicals. And then the natural recovery, where they just wait for the oil to be removed and spread out over the ocean. Now, that class brings me to sewage. So sewage is also a waste product of humans that we cannot change now. And with sewage, unfortunately, if it is not treated well, lots of diseases, non-parasitic diseases, polio, cholera, typhoid, hepatitis, which is caused by pathogens, and others like tapeworm, roundworm, and bilharzia are all diseases that exist due to untreated sewage. And the effects of typhoid, I show you here, high fever, headache, dry cough, constipation, rashes, all caused by a little bacteria with very long pili that you can see here. Cholera and dysentery, both stomach discomforts, and also very dangerous diseases. And then, very interesting, what is sewage? Sewage will be, and I read from your book, sewage will be pollutant from the kitchen, from the bathroom, and from the toilets, which contain human feces, detergents, bacteria, urine, parasites, and other disease-causing organisms. That is sewage. But when we refer to that part that came from the toilet, the feces and the urine, we know that urine and feces contains a lot of nitrogenous waste, especially urea. And what do we remember? That the urea can be changed into ammonium or ammonia. You agree? And when that ends up in the water bodies due to sewage that is being pumped into the water, it will provide nutrients for 1. Microorganisms, and microorganisms will immediately start to decompose it. When they decompose it, the microorganisms will be feeding, and in both these processes they used up oxygen. But that will also be nutrients to algae. And algae will start to bloom. It means they will become a lot. And they will cover the top layer of the water body. You agree? Here we have our nice water body, but now the top part is covered by algae bloom, lots of algae, and the microorganisms are using the oxygen to decompose and to become a lot. What will happen lower? No sunlight, no photosynthesis, no replacement of oxygen. No replacement of oxygen used up by the decomposers, and photosynthesis cannot take place. So now we will have more dead organisms due to the lack of oxygen. These algae will slowly start to die, and we will have a nasty smell in the bottom of this water body. But what we will also have is all the animals, the fish, and other organisms will either die or move away. And what do we call all of this? Eutrophication. Please make sure that you can write this answer on page 581 in your textbook, as that is now interesting that fertilizers ending up in water cause eutrophication. Fertilizers And do we use urine and feces for fertilizers? Also. So sewage and fertilizers contribute to eutrophication. And we must also remember that in sewage there can be lots of chemicals and detergents that can build up in organisms, bioaccumulation, and as it's moving down the food chain, it can magnificate. Biomagnification can happen at the end of the food chain, which means there's lots of toxic and poison in the organisms. Anaerobic organisms can produce methane, which is a greenhouse gas, and then of course this poisonous and bad smelling hydrogen sulfide that can also be a product of untreated sewage.
At ShopRite, we're giving you more ways to save. Save on deals like 1 kilo Top Score instant porridge for only $15.49 and a 900-gram can of Hazeldean mixed fruit jam for just $21.99. Get more ways to save when you need it most. Only at ShopRite. Lower prices you can trust. Always.
This brings us to our second last chapter, which will refer to the influence that humans have on the environment. We did start our ecology with what is a sustainable ecosystem. We know all the definitions. What is an ecosystem? A species forming populations. Populations forms communities. And we also see how important it is that the living factor, the organisms in a specific area at a specific time have an influence on one another, but also how the environment, which means the conditions, together with the living parts, have an effect on one another. Then we looked at populations, and it was interesting to see how differently the humans behave when we compare it to how a natural population behave. You remember the J curve, which is for humans and bacteria, and the S curve. And today we are going to spend some time on human influences on the environment. And I want to start with one of my favorite people of all time, and that was Chief C Hetel. He was an Indian, and he was a chief there who needed to guide and give leadership to his people, the Indians, that is in the same place as where Seattle in America is now. So he said, the earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. All things are connected like the blood that unites us all. Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. And that brings us, what is the influence of man to the environment? We start immediately with the food problem. Yes, as human numbers are increasing, the food supply needs to increase. But with increase in food supply, the farmers have an opportunity to earn money through that. So we have need of food, but also a way to use this food as an income. So what happens? Value of modern technology for increased food production. And what happens was that the old ways of working in the land with little equipment and taking lots of time changed by using huge machinery, mechanical methods. They can prepare the soil. Large areas of soil can be prepared in order to make sure that planting works well, that germination can take place, and of course that there's a good harvest. To have a good harvest, we know fertilizers need to be added. Now they have good machinery that can even apply the fertilizers. But we also know that we are in an ecosystem, so when we are planting nice growing vegetables, fruit production, or mealies, wheat, then there will also be some other organisms that would love to eat from it. When they become so many that they bring damage to the harvest, we need to use some pesticides, because then we say we have pests that is plaguing the harvest. So pesticides can also be provided by huge machineries. Faster production means that faster production, first at the market, more money. Faster production means also that there are food supply to a lot of people. Larger crops and less labor. That is what the value of modern technology means. Faster production, larger crops, less labor. Less labor means I do not have that many salaries or wages to pay at the end of the month. Right. This earns money. The pesticides, the fertilizers help to increase the harvest by producing better and larger produce. And in order to have all this, we know we need soil preparation to be perfect. We can also add here water supply, irrigation. The irrigation methods also are now done with huge spraying facilities. So that is the value. If we look at now specifically the use of fertilizers, we know that fertilizers are necessary in the form of nitrogen, right, in the form of nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium. And I always remember nitrogen for the roots. A plant starts at the roots. Then the phosphate will work on the stem, and the Potassium works on the fruits and the flowers. First flowers, then fruits. Now, and we know how important is nitrates, phosphates, potassium plus magnesium in order